Thanks for joining us for the 2022 Moon Family Distinguished Lecture. I'm LaShawn Jefferson, the Senior Executive Director of Perry Worldhouse. It gives me enormous pleasure to see such a full room. I wanted to welcome those of you who are online, those of you who are live here on Locust Walk, those of you who are here for the first time, and those of you who are here returning to our programs. I see some familiar faces in the audience, which is always wonderful. As Penn's hub for global affairs, Perry Worldhouse is honored to cooperate with the James Ju Jen Kim Center for Korean Studies for today's keynote program on the lessons the world might learn from how South Korea managed the COVID-19 pandemic, and to host former Prime Minister Chung of South Korea as a Perry Worldhouse global leader. As we enter yet another year of an endemic virus, South Korea has much to share with the world about how to respond to and potentially avoid other pandemics. I'd like to specifically thank Hyun-Jun Park, the director of the Center for Korean Studies, who's in the front row here, if you just want to stand up and wave. Seok Lee, the Associate Director, and their staff for working with us to make Prime Minister Chung's visit to Penn possible. Without them, we would not be putting on this program today. To introduce our esteemed guests for today's program, I would like to invite to the stage Stephen Fluharty, who is the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences and the Thomas S. Gates Jr. Professor of Psychology, Pharmacology, and Neuroscience here at Penn. Dean Fluharty has been a steadfast and generous supporter of both Perry Worldhouse and the Kim Center for Korean Studies. The podium is yours, Dean Fluharty.
Well, thank you, LaShawn, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the annual Moon Family Distinguished Lecture. This is a premier lecture series hosted by Penn's James Ju-Jen Kim Center for Korean Studies, and which annually features prominent figures in the field of Korean studies. We are so grateful to Il-soo Moon, who is with us today, for his family's generous support of this important event. Please join me. In past years, this lecture has been associated with the Kim program, but last fall we announced an extraordinary gift that established the James Ju-Jen Kim Center for Korean Studies in the School of Arts and Science. The center now provides a home for interdisciplinary scholarship on Korea and will help Penn further build on its reputation for excellence in Korea studies. I want to extend our heartfelt thanks to Jim and Agnes Kim, and also to their daughter Susan, who joins us today, for making this center a reality and for all they do for Penn. Please join me again. We are deeply privileged to have as our special guest today, Chung Sye-kyung, who served as the Republic of Korea's 49th Prime Minister from January 2020 to April 2021. Prime Minister Chung is the Perry Worldhouse Distinguished Global Leader for this academic year. Prime Minister Chung served as a member of South Korea's National Assembly for 6 terms and was Speaker of the Assembly from 2016 to 2018. Making him one of just 3 politicians in Korean history to serve as both Speaker and Prime Minister. From 2006 to 2007, he served as the country's Minister of Commerce, Industry and Energy, taking charge of the Republic's industry and energy policy and directing negotiations for foreign trades, including a free trade agreement with the United States. Chung took office as Prime Minister just as COVID-19 pandemic erupted. He presided over a national K quarantine strategy considered very effective compared to that of many other countries, and which is the subject of his lecture today. Chung is currently an executive advisor to the Democratic Party of Korea and chairman of the Roh-Moo-Hyun Foundation. Given the school and the university's commitment to the study of Korea, the Prime Minister's presence at Perry Worldhouse this year and today for the Moon Family Distinguished Lecture is indeed a very great honor, and I extend our warmest welcome to him. It is now my pleasure to turn the podium over to today's moderator, Hyun-Jun Park. Hyun is the Korean Foundation Professor of Sociology and Director of the James Ju-Jen Center for Korean Studies.
thanks to Dean Fluharty for the kind introductions. So with generous support from the Moon families, the Kim Center hosts the Moon Family Distinguished Lecture Series, which has been great opportunity to bring the prominent figures in Korean studies to Penn campus and also the Philadelphia community. This year, the Kim Center worked with the Perry World House to have the Prime Minister Chung as a distinguished global leaders at Perry World House, as well as a Moon Family Distinguished Lecturer at the James Eugene Kim Center for Korean Studies. I'm sure that you all watched the movie Parasite, TV show Squid Game, and perhaps listen to BTS and Blackpink. This is a great moment for Korean studies to show how the Korean experience can provide global implication beyond the Korean peninsula. So having Prime Minister Chung as this year's speakers, today's event represents the Kim Center's core mission to put Korea as a center in addressing global issues such as pandemic, climate change, migrations, and inequality. We look forward to your continued support and interest for the Kim Center. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Prime Minister Chung.
여러분 반갑습니다. 한국에서 온 정세균입니다. 먼저 세계적인 명문 유펜에 초청받게 된 것을 큰 영광으로 생각합니다. 뜻깊은 기회를 제공해 주신 페리 월드하우스와 제임스 주진 킴 센터 포 코리안 스터디스 관계자 여러분, 그리고 이 자리에 함께 하고 계신 모든 분들께 감사의 말씀을 드립니다.
Hello, this is Segun Chung from Korea. It's a great honor to be here at UPenn, and also I would like to thank Perry Ward House and James Eugene Kim Center for Korea Studies. This is a wonderful opportunity to learn from one another.
저는 코비드-19 발생 초기인 2020년 1월부터 이듬해인 2021년 4월까지 대한민국 제46대 국무총리직을 맡아 한국의 팬데믹 대응을 진두지휘한 바 있습니다. 오늘 이 자리에서 여러분과 함께 한국의 코비드-19 대응 경험을 공유하고 글로벌 차원의 협력 방안에 대해 이야기를 나누고자 합니다.
I served as the 46th Prime Minister of Korea, and this is during the time period of 2020 January through 2021 April. This is precisely the time when the pandemic COVID-19 had started. So I led the fight against COVID-19 in Korea. And this is a great opportunity for me to speak to you about the fight that we had in South Korea against COVID-19.
국제사회에서 한국은 코비드-19 초기 대응에 성공한 나라로 평가를 받고 있습니다. 이것은 각종 통계와 여러 실증 논문을 통해 검증된 사실입니다.
It is widely known in the international community that Korea has done quite well in its fight against COVID-19. There has been many statistics and substantiated theses and studies that show that we have indeed done well.
첫째 2020년 1월부터 2021년 상반기까지 초과 사망률 증가 경향이 나타나지 않았습니다. 그래프에서 보시는 것처럼 팬데믹 초기 점선으로 표시된 예측 사망률과 실선으로 표시된 실제 사망률 사이에 큰 차이가 없음을 확인할 수 있습니다.
In 2020, from January until the first part of 2021, we did not have an increase in the excess death. As you can see in the graph, during the beginning of the pandemic, the solid line, which indicates the expected death rate, and then the other line that indicates the excess death, we can see that there was, between the expected death and the actual death, there is no difference. As such, there was no excess death during this time period.
코비드-19 대응 과정에서 의료 시스템의 붕괴도 없었습니다. 화면에 나온 표는 팬데믹 첫 해였던 2020년 한 해 동안 한국을 비롯한 세계 10개국의 의료 서비스 제공 수준을 팬데믹 이전 수준을 기준으로 얼마나 감소했는지를 보여주는 것으로 한국은 팬데믹 이전과 거의 차이가 없는 것으로 확인되었습니다.
Also, there was no collapse of the medical system in fighting against the COVID-19. As you can see on the images, in the first year of pandemic, 2020, we are comparing it to 10 other countries. The level of medical services provided, you can see that the pandemic, prior to the pandemic and post the pandemic, Korea really has not shown any differences in the medical services provided at the level of it anyway. And as such, I think we have done quite well in that regard as well.
둘째, 팬데믹 과정에서 경제적 손실도 최소화하였습니다. 두 그래프는 2020년과 2021년 세계 각국의 GDP 손실과 인명 손실을 동시에 보여주고 있습니다. 초록색 화살표가 가리키는 곳이 한국입니다. 한국을 포함하여 빨간 점으로 표시된 다섯 개 나라는 생명 손실을 최소화했던 나라들입니다. 그 5개국 중에서도 경제적 손실이 가장 적었던 국가가 바로 한국입니다. 셋째, 무엇보다 정부, 시장, 시민사회 간 신뢰와 협력 속에서 락다운 없이 코비드-19 상황을 통제할 수 있었다는 점입니다. 그러나 한국이 처음부터 일사불란하게 코비드-19 상황을 관리할 수 있었던 것은 아닙니다.
Here, it also shows that the economic loss during the pandemic had been minimized in South Korea. There are two graphs here shown from 2020 to 2021. It indicates the GDP losses and the losses in lives. The green arrow indicates Korea, and Korea, including 5 other countries, show that there had been minimal deaths and lives lost. And then also these 5 other countries show that there had been minimal economic losses. And this was possible because we had trust and cooperation amongst the administration, the business, and the civic society. And we have done this without any lockdown. However, it's not to say that Korea was able to do all this from the very beginning.
제가 총리에 취임한 지 6일 만인 2020년 1월 20일 한국에서 첫 번째 확진자가 나왔습니다. 이때만 하더라도 코비드-19에 대한 정보가 없어서 중국 우한 지역에서 발생한 원인 불명의 무서운 폐렴 정도로 인식하고 있을 때였습니다.
So pandemic broke out after 6 days of me taking place as the prime minister. So I was taken by a surprise, and it was a surprise to all the other people who were involved because when we had our first positive confirmed patient, we really did not have information. This occurred on January 20th, 2020. And all that we knew at the time was that this was some type of a pneumonia that started from Wuhan in China.
2020년 2월 한국의 동남부 중심 도시인 대구시를 중심으로 특정 종교단체 교인 사이에서 집단 발병이 보고되기 시작했습니다. 하루 최대 1,000명 가까이 확진자가 발생하고 사망자가 속출하면서 국민적 우려도 매우 높아졌습니다.
In February, just the following month after January of 2020, in the central city of Daegu, we had a church which had a group breakout of the COVID-19, and it actually became a big issue because at that time, maybe more than 1,000 people per day were identified as positive, and then we had deaths that were coming up.
이대로 둬서는 안 되겠다는 판단 아래 주변의 만류에도 불구하고 총리가 직접 대구로 내려가 현장을 지휘하였습니다.
And I was very concerned. I did not want to leave it as is. I went down to Daegu, although many people had indicated that perhaps I should not be in the center of the pandemic.
저는 2020년 2월 25일부터 3월 중순까지 3주간 대구에 머물면서 민간 및 공공병원의 협조를 얻어서 음압병상 등 치료시설 확충에 온 힘을 기울였습니다.
So from February 25th, 2020 to the middle of March, for 3 weeks, I stayed in Daegu and I worked with the public health officials as well as the medical professionals. And what we did was to acquire the negative pressure hospital rooms and medical facilities first.
추가 확산 방지와 인명 보호를 위해 각종 연수시설, 호텔 등을 무증상 및 경증 환자 격리를 위한 생활치료센터로 전환하는 조치도 취했습니다.
Also, we have acquired conference facilities and hotels, and we use those facilities to separate light symptom patients. And this way, we were able to segregate the people one from the other.
마스크 부족 사태를 해결하기 위해서 마스크 공적 공급 조치 시행과 함께 약국 네트워크를 활용한 마스크 오브제 시행 등 다각적인 노력을 기울이며 사태 진정을 위해 노력했습니다.
Another problem we were facing were the lack of masks. We just didn't have enough numbers of them. And we had worked up a new network of pharmacists. And also we had alternating days when people could actually purchase these masks.
대한민국 국민들 또한 환자와 의료진을 위해 써달라면서 수많은 성금과 구호 물품을 보내왔고 전국 각지에서 대구 경북을 찾는 자원봉사자들의 행렬이 이어졌습니다.
At this point, Daegu of Gyeongbuk province became an epicenter, and many people within South Korea started sending money and supplies, as well as sending people to the epicenter. And we actually had quite a lot of volunteers trying to help.
이처럼 의료진의 헌신과 시민의 연대의식, 범정부적 노력이 모여서 신속하게 대구 경북의 코비드-19 유행 상황을 안정시킬 수 있었습니다.
The epicenter of Gyeongbuk province had actually stabilized rather quickly after these medical professionals and dedication of the civic groups, as well as the administration, were able to come together.
이러한 성과는 한국이 팬데믹 하에서도 2020년 4월 전국 단위 총선거, 11월 대학 수학 능력 시험을 잘 치러낼 수 있는 원동력이 되었습니다. 당시 많은 국가들이 락다운 정책을 사용하고 있던 것과 대비되는 지점입니다.
Around this time, April of 2020, there was a lockdown being carried out by many other countries. However, Korea did not have any lockdown. And we had carried out a general election in the April of 2020 successfully. And also in November of 2020, we had a college entrance examination, which is a big event in Korea. And we were able to carry that out well as well.
또한 글로벌 차원의 마스크 품귀 현상으로 어려움을 겪고 있던 미국과 전 세계 한국 전쟁 참전 용사들에게 마스크를 보내드린 바도 있습니다.
There was a global shortage of masks at the time. We were able to produce more of them and send to overseas, including those Korean War veterans who lived overseas.
초유의 팬데믹 상황을 맞이하여 저와 우리 정부는 방역과 일상, 방역과 경제라는 두 마리 토끼를 동시에 잡기 위해 최선을 다했고 다행히 유의미한 성과를 낼 수 있었습니다.
So this pandemic was unknown here to before, and it was our task, our government's task, to make sure that people were able to live on with their daily living, and also be able to quarantine and put a stop to the pandemic. So these were two rabbits we were trying to catch at once, and I do believe we had a meaningful success in that regards.
코비드-19에 대한 한국의 초기 대응이 성공할 수 있었던 것은 크게 네 가지 요소가 잘 작동했기 때문이라고 생각합니다.
In the initial responses Korea had, we were successful. I believe there were a few reasons for that.
첫째, 중앙정부의 적극적인 리더십과 지방정부의 협력이 빚어낸 결과입니다.
There was the cooperation between the central government and the provincial government.
코비드-19 확산 초기 국무총리를 본부장으로 하는 중앙대책본부 체계를 가동시켰습니다. 온라인 화상 시스템을 기반으로 중앙정부와 17개 광역지방자치단체, 226개 기초지방자치단체가 매일 머리를 맞대고 긴밀한 상호소통을 통해 전국적 상황을 점검, 현장의 애로사항을 실시간으로 정책에 반영하였습니다.
We had an online video conference that was held every morning. And I was the leader in the headquarters for the central government. And then there were 17 regional governments as well as 226 municipal governments. We came together every day and we discussed the issues that we had online. And this was the communication that enabled us to learn from one another.
특히 투명성, 민주성, 개방성이라는 3대 원칙 하에 모든 정보를 국민에게 투명하게 공개하고 방역에 대한 시민의 자발적 결정권을 존중하고 참여를 유도하는 한편 국경 및 지역 봉쇄 없이 일상을 영위하는 가운데 코비드-19 상황을 관리할 수 있었습니다.
There were three principles that we were operating under. One, transparency. Two, democracy. And third, openness. And under the three principles, we allowed everybody to know what was going on. That's the transparency. And we respected the people's volunteerism when it comes to quarantine. And that would be democracy. And then the openness was by allowing people to travel without any lockdown. And this was how we were able to manage the COVID-19.
둘째, TTT 플러스 IQ 전략입니다. 5개의 알파벳 중 첫 번째 T는 테스트입니다. 감염병 대응에 있어서 최우선 요소가 바로 확진자를 빠르고 정확하게 선별하는 것입니다.
Second, there was the TTT plus IQ strategy, basically a triple T plus IQ. The first letter of the five is T, meaning test. The response to pandemic, the first thing that we did and we needed was a fast, rapid, and accurate testing.
한국 정부는 2020년 1월부터 체계적 민관 협력을 통해 코비드-19 진단 역량 구축에 나섰습니다. 특히 위기 상황에 대응하기 위해 적극 행정 제도를 활용, 평소 수개월씩 걸리는 진단 시약 인증 절차를 일주일로 단축시켰으며 이로 인해 그 어느 나라보다 신속하게 진단 키트를 확보할 수 있었습니다. 한국 기업이 만든 진단 키트는 세계로 수출돼 각국의 대응 역량을 높이는 데 크게 기여한 바 있습니다.
For the rapid and accurate testing, we made sure that we had the ability to test as fast as we can. And for that to happen, there had to be an active administration which allowed for test kits to be approved sooner than later. And these certification processes were reduced. And we believe these certification processes, once the request was made, we were able to certify within 1 week. And this was faster than any other country. And we were able to obtain as many test kits as we needed and more. And the test kits that were made by Korean companies had since then been exported throughout the world.
이와 함께 개별 지자체마다 무료 선별 검사소를 설치하고 드라이브 스루와 같은 창의적 검사 시스템을 도입, 대규모 선제적 진단 검사를 통한 환자의 조기 발견에 성공할 수 있었습니다.
Along with that, it was important for us to identify those patients early. And for each provincial government, they actually established free testing sites. These included drive-through and other ways of testing. And this was more of a preemptive testing. You didn't have to have the symptoms to test.
두 번째 T는 트레이싱입니다. 한국 정부는 민간의 협조를 얻어 위치 정보, 신용카드 이용 내역과 같은 각종 디지털 정보를 수집하고 전자 출입 명부 제도 도입 등을 통해서 확진자 및 접촉자를 발빠르게 추적하고 선별할 수 있었습니다.
The second T of the triple T is tracing. Korean government, with the cooperation of the civic organizations and the public, we were able to obtain the location of those who had positive symptoms. We were also able to obtain the credit card usage information. And these information, once obtained, we were able to digitalize them. We also had entry and exit system which were digitally traced as well. So once we learned who was positive and who had actually had come into contact with the positive person, we were able to identify all of them very fast.
세 번째 T는 트리트먼트입니다. 확진자의 증상과 유형에 따른 적절한 의료적 대응을 통해 의료 자원을 효과적으로 활용, 이는 높은 치료 성공률과 낮은 사망률로 이어졌습니다.
The third T of the triple T is treatment. Once we were able to identify the positive person, then we started utilizing our medical resources to ensure that they received the proper treatment. This led to high success ratio and low death rate.
다음은 아이솔레이션입니다. 충분한 테스트 역량을 기반으로 신속 진단과 생활치료센터 설치와 같은 혁신적 접근을 통해 확진자를 격리하고 추가 전파를 효과적으로 차단할 수 있었습니다.
After the triple T comes the isolation. The I stands for isolation, which basically is a segregation of the positive from other people. This was enabled by having a separate living medical center, which it was a result of rapid testing that was possible. And once you had rapid testing, they would be segregated into a living medical centers.
마지막으로 쿼런틴입니다. 컨택 트레이싱 체계를 기반으로 밀접 접촉자를 대상으로 한 효과적인 자가격리 체계야말로 과학적으로 무증상 감염 존재 여부가 규명되지 않았던 팬데믹 초기에 한국이 바이러스 전파 차단에 성공할 수 있었던 핵심 요인이었습니다.
After triple T and I, there comes the Q for quarantine. Whereas the isolation was for the patients themselves, quarantine was for the people who came into contact with those positive people. And this was very effective in the beginning because in the beginning, as you know, we did not know what kind of symptoms would be shown by those people who came into contact. And self-quarantine was very effective in South Korea in this regard.
셋째, 의료기관 내 코비드-19 환자와 비코비드-19 환자 간 감염 방지 시스템 구축입니다.
Third was the prevention of cross-contamination between COVID-19 patients and non-COVID patients.
한국 정부는 팬데믹에 효과적으로 대응하기 위해 호흡기 질환에 대하여 병원 방문부터 입원까지 진료 전 과정에서 다른 환자와 분리하여 진료하는 국민 안심병원을 지정 운영하였습니다.
From the onset of the pandemic, what we have done was to identify those patients who had respiratory symptoms. And for these respiratory symptoms, from the very admission into the hospital through a treatment, they were separately treated in separate facilities.
이는 코비드-19 감염에 대한 국민의 불안감을 줄이고 병원 내 감염 위험으로부터 환자와 의료인을 보호하는 한편 비코비드-19 질환자에 대한 의료 서비스를 보장할 수 있었던 바탕이 되었습니다.
It was important that we separate the respiratory patients from non-respiratory patients because there was a growing concern and fear that patients might be contaminated by coming into contact with respiratory patients. And by separating them into different facilities, we were able to ensure that the other regular patients would not be so much in fear.
넷째, 국민의 자발적 연대와 협력입니다. 아시아 최고의 민주주의 국가인 한국은 성숙한 시민 문화가 자리 잡고 있습니다. 이러한 시민의식에 맞춰 정부는 수평적이고 설득적 리더십을 통해 방역의 전 과정에서 국민의 이해와 동의를 구하고자 노력하였습니다.
Fourthly, it was the volunteerism of the people and also the alliance and cooperation amongst the people and the government together. Korea boasts itself as the best democratic country in Asia. We have mature civic culture. that allows for a horizontal and persuasive leadership to work with people. So the government was able to, throughout this quarantine period, to obtain the understanding and the compliance of the people, voluntary compliance of the people.
특히 투명성, 민주성, 개방성에 근거한 방역 시스템은 정부 정책에 대한 국민의 신뢰도를 높였고 매우 빠른 속도로 높은 백신 접종률을 달성할 수 있었습니다.
Under the three principles of transparency, democracy, and openness, the government was able to have an effective quarantine system through trust that it has obtained from the people. And once you have the trust, it was possible to have high rate of vaccination amongst the population.
이와 더불어 확진 격리와 자가 격리로 인해 초래된 임금 손실 및 소상공인 자영업자 영업 손실 등에 대한 정부의 적극적 보전과 물질적 지원 노력도 병행하였습니다.
With the IQ, the isolation and voluntary quarantine, there had been some economic losses sustained by the people who were involved, and the government had compensated these people and also the businesses who were negatively affected.
이러한 정부의 노력과 성숙한 시민의식이 결합돼 한국 사회 내 공생의 원리가 잘 작동할 수 있었습니다.
So the idea is mutual community living, that the government and the civic mind come together to make sure that everybody is able to survive together.
한국이 팬데믹 초기 대응에 성공할 수 있었던 사회적 요인에 대해 크게 두 가지 가설이 있었습니다.
There were two hypothetical ideas as to why Korea was successful in the beginning stages of the pandemic.
하나는 프랑스 출신의 석학인 기소르망 박사의 견해로 개인보다 공동체를 중시하는 유교 문화가 많은 영향을 끼쳤다는 입장이고, 다른 하나는 성숙한 시민 민주주의의 승리라는 입장입니다.
One of those two hypotheses was by Dr. Guy Soromang of France. He said that Koreans tend to emphasize the community and that the Confucius culture was quite influential in Korea's response. And the other hypothesis is that it's because Korea is a matured democracy.
여러분은 어느 쪽이 그럴듯해 보이십니까?
Which one would you pick?
이와 관련해서 2020년 5월 두 곳의 언론사와 서울대학교가 공동으로 기획하고 대한민국 성인 남녀 1000명을 대상으로 실시한 여론조사 결과는 우리에게 특별한 시사점을 제공해주고 있습니다.
I won't give you my thoughts, but I'll give you the study that has been carried out. In May of 2020, there were two press and Seoul University which came together and did a joint survey of 1,000 adults in South Korea.
조사 결과 권위주의, 수능 지향, 집단주의적 성향과 방역 참여도와는 통계적 연관성을 찾을 수 없었습니다. 오히려 민주적 시민성, 수평적 개인주의 성향이 강할수록 방역 참여도가 높은 것으로 나타났습니다.
What the survey returned was that the authoritarianism or compliance or the collectivism really did not have any influence in the participation in quarantine by the people. So there was no statistical significance there. Rather, it was the democracy, the civic mindedness, and the horizontal individualism, which allowed for higher participation in the quarantine.
이것은 자유로운 개인인 동시에 공동체에 기여하고자 하는 시민의식이 발휘된 결과로 해석할 수 있습니다.
So the way it is interpreted is that there is the free individualism and at the same time desire to contribute to the community. So this is the civic mind of the Koreans.
또한 코비드-19에 대한 인식을 묻는 항목에서 내가 확진될까 봐 두렵다는 응답은 64%인데 반해서 주변 사람들에게 피해를 끼칠까 봐 두렵다는 응답은 86%로 전자에 비해 20%나 더 높게 나타났습니다.
And another part of the survey asked, what are you most afraid of when it comes to COVID-19? And the response for 64% of people had been that I am afraid that I'll become positive. And then another 86%, which is 20% more than the prior answer, was that I am afraid that I may harm my neighbors.
이것은 나를 위해서가 아니라 타인을 위해 방역 수칙을 더 잘 지킨다는 해석이 가능한 대목입니다.
What this does indicate is that Korean people, not only for themselves, but they were concerned more for their neighbors when they voluntarily quarantined themselves.
한국이 코로나19 초기 대응을 효과적으로 이뤄낼 수 있었던 데에는 앞서 지적한 네 가지 핵심 요인 외에 몇 가지 추가적 혹은 행운적 요소들이 기여했습니다.
It's not to say that Koreans did all this by themselves. There were some lucky breaks that the Koreans had.
첫째는 국경 통제의 용이성입니다. 미국, 유럽과 같은 대륙 국가와 달리 삼면이 바다로 둘러싸인 한국은 북한과 국경이 가로막힌 사실상의 섬나라입니다. 육로를 통한 국경 진입이 거의 불가능한 조건인 것입니다.
It's the geography. Korea is a peninsula, but it's really more of an island when you think about it, because Korea is blocked off to the north by North Korea. So we are truly an island that is a peninsula.
이는 코비드-19의 질병 특성을 과학적으로 충분히 규명하지 못한 팬데믹 초기에 국경을 통한 인적 접촉의 최소화 혹은 적극적 조절이 가능했던 행운적 요인이 되었습니다.
This was a lucky break Korea had gotten because in the beginning when the COVID-19 broke out, there was not enough scientific studies as to the characteristics of the pandemic. And we did not know how to best control the pandemic. One way we could have done was to make sure that there is no outside influence or outside pandemic that was coming through the borderlines.
이러한 지리적 조건은 한국과 더불어 팬데믹 초기 대응에 성공한 대만, 일본, 뉴질랜드, 호주, 아이슬란드의 공통점이기도 합니다.
There were other countries which were quite successful in heading off the pandemic in the beginning, which would include Taiwan, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Iceland, and these were all commonly islands themselves.
둘째는 전국민 건강보험 제도입니다. 전염병의 검사 및 치료 비용을 모두 국가가 부담하는 전국민 건강보험 제도가 확립된 한국은 이용자의 비용 장벽 없이 의료 서비스 이용이 가능했기에 초기 발빠른 대처가 이루어질 수 있었습니다.
Austria, rather. And the second lucky break we had was something we had in already, which is the general health insurance available to everybody. So the government was able to pay for all the testing and treatment of the pandemic from the very beginning because we had that public health plan already in place.
셋째는 한국이 보유한 첨단 ICT 기술입니다. 한국은 뛰어난 ICT 기술을 바탕으로 한 접촉 추적 시스템 구축을 통해 감염자의 감염원에 대한 상류로의 추적과 감염자 접촉으로 인한 하류로의 추가 감염 전파 경로 파악을 용이하게 할 수 있었습니다.
Third is the advanced ICT technology Korea already possessed at the time. Because we had the information technology necessary already to do the contact tracing, it was not as hard to make sure that we trace those people upstream as well as downstream to ensure that we learn who have come into contact with the positive patients.
넷째는 실패를 통한 학습 효과입니다. 대한민국은 2015년 메르스 유행 당시 사우디아라비아 다음으로 가장 피해를 입은 나라입니다. 한국 정부는 메르스 대응 실패를 교훈 삼아 국가적 차원의 감염병 대응 시스템 구축을 위해 여러 가지 노력을 기울였습니다.
Fourth was the lessons we have learned from our earlier failures. Back in 2015, when Mideastern respiratory syndrome was ongoing, Korea had the largest damages next to Saudi Arabia. And this was because of the failure of the Korean government to respond properly to this pandemic. And ever since, we have learned and we have built a system that would be more effective in responding to this type of pandemic.
먼저 제도적 차원에서는 2015년 법률 개정을 통해 비상사태 시 관계 당국이 감염 확진자 및 의심자의 개인정보를 수집할 수 있는 권한을 부여하였습니다.
In 2015, we passed a new law that is called Communicable Disease Prevention and Controls Act. And under the act, we had been given the authority under when in emergency that the administration can obtain the private information of those people who are suspected of being a carrier.
또한 정부는 2017년 이후 전염병 진단검사 기술에 예산을 투자해 진단 키트 기술 개발 및 대량 제조 역량을 확보해 왔습니다.
Also, from 2017 on, the government had invested in the pandemic test technology and test kits. So there had been budgets allocated for mass manufacturing of these test kits.
이외에도 보건소 등 지역사회 내 감염병 대응 역량을 갖춘 인적 자원을 선제적으로 확충하고 있었던 점도 위기 극복의 한 요인이 되었다고 하겠습니다.
Also, we did have quite a bit of medical personnel who were already available in the community. We had the health centers and hospitals who were able to work on these pandemic-related issues readily.
그러나 아쉬운 점도 존재합니다.
That's not to say everything had been successful.
그래프에서 확인할 수 있던 한국은 2021년 상반기까지는 초과 사망이 발생하지 않을 정도로 방역 관리를 잘 해왔으나 2021년 여름부터 최근까지 확진자가 대폭 증가했고 이에 따라 초과 사망률 또한 증가하는 추세를 보여주고 있습니다.
What the graph indicates here is that up until the first half of 2021, the excess death has not occurred, so the quarantine worked quite well. And perhaps by chance, after I stepped down as the prime minister,
It's true.
The positive numbers started going up, rising rapidly from the summer of 2021, and also the excess death had increased.
하지만 이 대목에서 한국이 실패한 것이 아닌가라는 오해는 하지 않으시길 바랍니다.
However, I do not want you to think that Korea had failed from then on.
이러한 확진자 증대에도 불구하고 2022년 9월 말 기준 코비드-19로 인한 한국의 누적 치명률은 0.11%로 세계에서 가장 낮은 수준을 보여주고 있으며 1.1%를 기록하고 있는 미국의 10분의 1 수준입니다.
So there was the increase in the positive patients, and as of end of September 2022, the cumulative death rate for COVID-19 had been 0.11%, which actually was the lowest percentage in the world. By comparison, the US had 1.1% death rate.
어쨌든 2021년 후반부터 새롭게 나타난 확진자 증가는 백신 접종이 순조롭게 이루어지는 가운데 방역 피로감이 누적되고 있는 상황 속에서 스마트 방역 의료 시스템을 활용한 TTT-IQ 전략에서 한 발 물러나 사회적 거리두기 중심의 방역으로 전환한 결과라고 볼 수 있습니다.
So what happened in the second half of 2021? We actually moved away from the triple T IQ strategy, and we started to go into social distancing. That was the quarantine system that we started employing. So we moved away from smart quarantine using digital technology to people-to-people quarantine.
그럼에도 불구하고 코비드-19 팬데믹 상황에서 한국이 보여준 놀라운 성과는 국제사회에 유의미한 참고 자료가 될 거라 확신합니다.
At the time of social distancing, there was the fatigue from continued quarantine. And I do regret that perhaps before I step down as the Prime Minister, that I should have completed the digital foundation for the quarantine system.
코비드-19과 같은 글로벌 보건위기는 기후위기와 함께 안보에 대한 개념을 더욱 확장시키고 있습니다. 국방 경제 중심의 전통적 안보 개념에서 인간 안보로 범위를 넓혀가고 있는 것입니다.
What COVID-19 has told us and taught us is that there's a new security risk. We are not just looking at the defense, military, economic securities, but we are also looking at human security.
인류는 팬데믹 과정 속에서 모든 사람이 안전하기까지 아무도 안전하지 않다는 교훈을 얻을 수 있었습니다. 몇몇 국가만 잘한다고 전 지구적 위기가 해소되지 않는다는 현실을 직시해야 합니다.
We are not safe as humans unless everybody is safe, because what we learn from the pandemic is that just because a few countries are doing well does not mean everybody will survive.
또한 코비드-19 이후에도 이와 유사한 사례들은 얼마든지 나올 수 있습니다. 이미 원숭이 두창과 같은 제2, 제3의 팬데믹 후보들이 등장하고 있는 상황입니다.
COVID-19 may be coming to an end, but it's not the end of all pandemic. This actually might be a beginning of more pandemics to come. We know we already have the monkey smallpox, and then there are other pandemic possibilities.
참고로 20세기 이후 발생한 신종 감염병의 75% 이상이 인수 공통 감염병이라고 합니다. 미국 조지타운대 글로벌 보건안보센터에 따르면 앞으로 지구 온도가 섭씨 2도 오를 경우 향후 50년간 최소 1만 5천 건의 새로운 종간 전파가 발생할 것으로 예측되고 있습니다.
It is said that for all pandemics or contagious disease that occurred since the 20th century, more than 75% were zoonoses. And the Georgetown Global Health Security Center states that when the global temperature increases by 2 Celsius degrees within the next 50 years, more than 15,000 interspecific contagions will occur.
효과적인 코비드-19 극복과 넥스트 팬데믹 대비를 위해서는 각국의 성공 및 실패 사례에 대한 분석과 함께 체계적인 국제 공조 시스템을 구축해야 합니다.
In order to be more effective going for the next pandemic that will take place, we do have to learn from the success and the failures of other countries, and we have to have an international cooperation, not just in words, but in a system that would allow for international cooperation to actually take place.
이를 위해 학술적, 기술적, 정치적 차원의 교류 협력을 강화할 필요가 있습니다. 이미 한국은 코비드-19 대응 경험을 여러 나라들과 다양한 채널을 통해 공유해 오고 있습니다.
And for the international cooperation system to be established, we need to have exchange academically, technically, and also on a political level. Korea has already shared its lessons with other countries, and I encourage others to do the same.
대한민국은 미국, 영국에 이어 전 세계에서 코비드-19 백신과 치료제를 자체 개발 생산한 세 번째 국가입니다. 금년 2월에는 WHO 글로벌 바이오 인력 양성 허브로 단독 지정된 바도 있습니다.
Korea, after the US and UK, is the third country to actually mass produce COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. And in the February of this year, WHO has designated Korea as the manufacturing training, mass manufacturing training hub for pandemic-related, biomanufacturing hub. My apologies.
이러한 기술력과 인프라, 방역 경험을 바탕으로 한국은 중저소득 국가를 위해 백신과 바이오의약품 생산 공정에 대한 교육 및 훈련을 제공해 나갈 예정입니다.
And with the technology that we have in South Korea and the infra we have built, as well as the experience of quarantine, we hope and we intend to help middle and low-income countries with the production of vaccines and biomedicines, and also provide education and training to those countries.
짧은 시간이지만 코비드-19과 관련한 한국의 경험을 여러분과 나눌 수 있어 기쁘게 생각합니다.
This was a short presentation, but I am quite happy that I was able to share Korea's experience with you.
한국은 식민 지배와 한국 전쟁의 폐허를 딛고 세계 10위권의 경제대국으로 성장했으며 3050 클럽에 가입한 7번째 국가가 되었습니다. 2차 세계대전 이후 공적 개발 원조 수여국에서 기여국으로 변모한 유일한 나라이기도 합니다.
Korea is a unique country. We have become the only country after the Second World War II to turn into a donor country from a donee country. And we have also had many years of colonialism, as well as the Korean War, which decimated the country. However, we are now a top 10 economic country, and we are in 3050 Club, which is the 7th country only in the world stage.
또한 한국은 현재 세계 6위의 군사력을 보유하고 있으며 자력으로 인공위성을 쏘아올린 7번째 국가입니다. K-뮤직, K-무비 등 문화 분야를 중심으로 소프트 파워도 높여나가고 있습니다.
Korea also is now ranked as the 6th most strong country in the military, and also we have been the 7th country to send a satellite on our outside of the hemisphere, and we now have K-music, K-movie, and we have all this soft power. What are we going to do now?
이러한 한국의 성공 배경에는 굳건한 한미동맹이 있었습니다. 내년이면 한미동맹의 근간이 된 한미 상호 방위조약 체결 70주년을 맞이합니다.
Next year marks the 70th year where we have a Korea-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty, which is the very cornerstone of the Korea-U.S. relationship. And I want you to know that our success in South Korea was not possible without the strong Korea-U.S. alliance.
앞으로도 한국은 미국을 비롯한 국제사회의 도움으로 일어선 과거를 잊지 않고 보건의료 분야를 비롯한 국제협력의 선도 국가로 발돋움해 나갈 것입니다.
Korea will not forget the help of the U.S. as well as the international community. We will repay. We will repay in the areas of health and medicine, as well as in international cooperations. We will be the leading country that helps people to come together as well as countries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for very interesting and very, I think, informative, the talks about how Korea dealt with this, the COVID-19. So we'll start to have some questions. So if you have some questions, you need to line up there. I know that it's hard you need the courage to actually stand up and go there to ask the question. And I know that you're now actually asking yourself whether I should stand up. So I will give it a few minutes because I actually have a privilege to ask a first question, so that while I'm asking the question and Prime Minister Chung actually respond to your question, you can think about yourself and just line up there and ask question. Please, to ask a question not only for the COVID-19 but all other issue in Korea, because Minister Chung actually has deal with many other issues as well, especially the foreign relations. I know that many of you are interested about North Korea, not only South Korea. Yeah, all those issues will be very interesting to ask the question. So let me start with Prime Minister Chung. You talked about a lot about COVID-19 and showed that how Korea actually really important case actually to show and demonstrate about the role of the Korea. And besides COVID-19, can you illustrate another case where you think the Korea is a really important role or play important roles for the global community?
네, 제가 그 클로징 멘트에서도 말씀드렸다시피 우리 대한민국은 지난 70년 동안에 엄청난 변화를 만들어냈죠. 그것은 혼자 한 것이 아니고 미국을 비롯한 국제사회와 협력을 통해서 그런 성과를 낼 수 있었기 때문에 앞으로는 이제 대한민국이 지금까지 이 외국으로부터 받은 것을 더 어려운 나라들에게 돌려줘야 될 때다라고 생각을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 ODA 규모를 늘리는 등 국제 협력을 강화해서 중견국으로서 국제 평화와 번영에 우리 대한민국이 잘 기여하고자 합니다.
As I have stated in my closing remark, in the 70 years, we have seen rapid economic success in South Korea, but we could not have done it alone. We had the help of the US and the international community, and we do intend to pay it back. And we are doing that, in fact. As the middle power, we are increasing our ODA and will continue to contribute towards peace and prosperity on the global stage.
So I see actually some brave people just standing up, they're waiting for the question. So can you say your name briefly, and before you ask the question? Thank you.
Does it work? Okay, it works. So my name's Jungmin Shin Dan. It's first of all a great honor to be meeting you and listening to your presentation. And my question is, ever since the start of the pandemic, the investment into bioengineering has increased like twofold, threefold, and the attention of bioengineering and biomedical engineering by social media exploded. But with that divestment of like funding into bioengineering, how did that, now we start to realize that parts of Europe may not be able to go completely carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050. So what are certain problems that we had to overlook to overcome the pandemic much faster for South Korea?
예, 말씀하신 것처럼 그 최근에 한국이 바이오 분야에 투자를 많이 했습니다. 그리고 역량을 상당히 강화를 했지만 아직은 이제 선진국 수준에는 이르지 못했죠. 그렇지만 그 바이오 관련 그 회사들의 주가가 굉장히 높습니다. 그것은 그만큼 기대를 하고 있다는 이야기죠. 그리고 기술력도 선진국의 60-70% 수준에서 지금은 80-90% 수준까지 올라가 있기 때문에 앞으로 국내뿐만 아니라 전 지구적으로 한국의 바이오 관련 업계가 필요한 역할을 할 수도 있고 또 경제적으로도 성공할 수 있을 것으로 기대하고 있습니다.
Thank you.
That's true. We have been investing more heavily in the bio industry lately, and I do think our bio industry has grown by leaps and bounds. Nevertheless, I don't think we are there yet. We're not on par with the advanced nations, whereas we used to be perhaps 60 to 70% of their capacity or their abilities. I believe we are about maybe 80 to 90% of the advanced nations. So our technologies are catching up real fast, and the stock prices does indicate that the market expects the industry to become much more economic, make much more economic sense. The bio industry will be a strong industry for Korea. And I believe it will be filling the needs of the global community as well as make more economic sense.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next question.
안녕하세요. 저는 Bonnie입니다. Hi, my name is Bonnie. I am a graduate student at the Wharton School, and I'm actually writing a paper about why K-pop specifically became so successful. If you want to do that part. My question for you is, you talked about how the government does think that soft power is very important, so including K-movies, K-dramas, K-pop. How do you think about investing in that industry? And are you investing in specific companies, or how do those investments actually reach the companies?
최근에 K-팝, K-무비, K-뮤직이 세계인들의 사랑을 받고 있어요. 그래서 한편으로는 놀랍기도 하고 또 반갑기도 하고 또 앞으로 어떻게 이걸 지속 가능하게 할 것인가 걱정도 됩니다. 사실은 한국에서 이 분야에 대한 투자보다는 그 성과가 더 컸다고 지금까지 생각을 합니다. 앞으로는 이 분야에 대한 투자도 늘리고 그 국제화도 하고 하는 노력을 통해서 세계인들과 함께 한국의 문화적인 역량을 함께 향유할 수 있는 그런 노력을 펼치고자 합니다.
감사합니다.
So the K-pops, which are part of K-music as well as K-movie and other K-cultural items, have indeed become more of a popular culture throughout the world, which was actually a surprise to us. And nevertheless, we accept it as a happy signal. However, my concern is that maybe it's not sustainable, and we need to find the ways to make sure that it continues. Our investment has turned out to be much better, meeting much better results than we had invested. However, once we are able to invest more into K-culture and more internationalization of the K-culture, I think we would see more success, and perhaps we could enjoy more of the Korean culture globally.
I'm a little worried that we may not end up with some of you at the end of the line, but please stay there. I mean, we'll make as quickly as possible. Okay, next, the question, please.
Oh, 반갑습니다. My name is Caitlin Kim. I'm a law student here, and actually, thanks to your COVID policies, I was able to work in Korea during 2021 and live there too. So thank you. My question is, how did you work with medical experts to inform your policy-making decisions, and what role did data and science play in your decision-making process?
예, 우리 정부는 전문가들과 조인트 컨퍼런스를 자주 했습니다. 제가 직접 중대본부장이기 때문에 여러 분야의 전문가들과 매주 한 번 정도, 그래서 정부가 어떤 중요한 정책을 결정하기 전에 전문가들과의 토론과 소통을 통해서 그 의견을 경청한 다음에 최적의 결론을 낼 수 있었고, 또 그렇게 결정을 해야 일반 국민들로부터 순응하는, 협조하는 그런 것을 얻을 수 있었기 때문에 소통과 협력을 열심히 했습니다.
Thank you.
So our administration made sure that we listen to the experts. There had been many joint conferences that were held. Since I was the head of our headquarters for this effort, we held a meeting at least once a week with the experts. And before any decisions are made by the government, we made sure to obtain the experts' opinions. And this is our way of communicating. Once we have the experts' opinions and make a sound judgment, we were able to communicate to the public, and the results were cooperation.
Thank you. Maybe you noticed that a couple of students start their remark as 반갑습니다, which is great to see you. So there's a 30-second Korean language, the lesson was that. Okay, next question.
Here we go, 30-second. Okay, dear Prime Minister Chan, I'd like to ask some advice you would give for students who are about to go into this incredible world, and what are we going to do to live a fruitful life like you did?
예, 뭐 여러분들이 저보다 더 잘 알겠죠. 그렇지만 저는 항상 도전해야 된다. 도전. 그리고 꿈을 가지고 해야 된다. 그리고 능력보다는 열정이 더 중요하다. 그런 말씀을 하고 싶습니다.
I'm sure you already know the answer. You have to continue to challenge yourself, and you must have a dream, follow your dream. And it's not your ability, but your passion that drives you.
Next question.
Hi, Prime Minister. As you mentioned, the COVID-19 crisis was a really great opportunity for the world to come together. But different from the Cold War that US and USSR were able to work together on political crisis, this time the COVID-19 crisis actually exacerbated geopolitical tensions between China and the US, and especially changing the security structure in East Asia. And I'm wondering, what's the role that Korea imagined itself to play in the East Asian security structure, considering you mentioned that the US-Korea Mutual Security Alliance is the foundation for US-Korea relations? Thank you.
예, 미국은 세계적으로 많은 동맹국을 가지고 있지만 한국은 미국이 유일한 동맹국입니다. 그래서 어떤 다른 나라보다도 한미 관계를 가장 중시하고 있죠. 그런데 최근에 미중 관계가 껄끄러워서 한국이 불편합니다. 그래서 이제 어려운 문제들도 국제 간에 잘 풀어나가면서 국제사회가 협력하는 그런 분위기가 만들어지면 한국은 훨씬 좋을 것 같은데 세상 일이 꼭 그렇게만 되는 것 같지 않아요. 그래서 한국은 미국과 긴밀하게 협력하면서 여러 가지 전략도 잘 구사하고 공동 번영을 위해서 노력할 것입니다.
The U.S. has many allies. However, for Korea, the only ally under an alliance is the U.S. And as such, for Korea, the Korea-U.S. relationship is the most important relationship that we enjoy. The problem is that now the relationship between Korea and China has soured. And this is very uncomfortable for South Korea. In the international relations, cooperation is a must, and it should be the priority for all the members involved. However, cooperation, it's easier said than done. I do wish that there would be continued cooperation, especially between Korea and the U.S., because this is the alliance that we rely on the heaviest.
Thank you. The next question, please.
Prime Minister Chan, nice to meet you again. My name is Wenjiao Cai, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Kim Center for Korean Studies. So toward the end of your lecture, you made a very powerful statement that no one is safe until everyone is safe. So what do you think are some of the barriers to effective global COVID responses? And what do you think that Korea can teach international responses to global crisis, not only the pandemic, but also such crises as climate change? And what's Korea's plan to contribute to international efforts to fight these crises? Thank you.
예, 기후 변화에 대응함에 있어서 한국은 상당한 어려움이 있어요. 왜냐하면 한국이 유감스럽게도 탄소를 굉장히 많이 배출하는 나라예요. 그런데도 불구하고 한국은 2050년 넷제로를 이미 선언을 했습니다. 그래서 그 목표에 도달하기 위해서 많은 노력이 필요하다고 생각해요. 그리고 투자도 많이 해야 되고요. 이제 국제사회의 일원으로 특히 지난 반세기 동안에 성공을 거둔 나라 중에 하나로서 한국은 국제사회에 대한 책임을 다해야 되고 특히 기후변화 같은 데에 선도적으로 노력을 해야 된다고 생각합니다. 그런데 아마 고통이 굉장히 클 것 같아요. 그럼에도 불구하고 대한민국은 그런 노력을 하기로 결심을 했습니다.
So climate change, I would even call it a climate crisis. We have difficulty, however, in addressing it in South Korea because South Korea is a massive carbon-producing country as of now. We have, however, declared that 2050 will be a net zero year for South Korea. There's a lot of things that we need to do. There's got to be a lot of efforts that goes in, and as well as much investment to be made. In the past half a century, Korea has met with much economic success. With that comes the international responsibilities that Korea must address. So we will continue to be a responsible member of the global community. However, this addressing of the climate change will bring a lot of pain. A lot of pain is expected for Korea, and we will endure.
Oh, I know that two of you will hate me, but it will be the last question because I have one question and I received it through Zoom, so I will give an equal chance to the Zoom audience as well. So please don't hate me. And actually tomorrow we'll have actually another, the session. So hopefully you can join us actually tomorrow as well. So please.
예, 아주 가장 좋은 질문을 해주신 것 같습니다. 저는 대한민국의 새 대통령이 꼭 성공하는 대통령이 되었으면 좋겠어요. 그분을 위해서가 아니고 대한민국 국민을 위해서 그리고 한미 관계를 위해서도 그분이 꼭 성공하는 대통령이 되었으면 좋겠습니다. 불만은 많아요.
You ask a very important question. I want the new president to succeed. I want him to be a successful president, not because of him or for him only, but it's for the Koreans. We need our Korean president to be successful. And also I want him to stand strong for the Korea-US alliance. Having said that, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that I'm not happy.
Yeah, probably knew that he's the oppositional party, so that's why. So the final question from the Zoom is, how did the contact tracing effort by the government affect the personal security and surveillance issue, like not only for health issue, but also personal surveillance issue?
예, 그 트레이싱을 할 때 그런 문제 제기가 있었어요. 그래서 이제 입법을 통해서 이 방역 목적 이외에는 그 정보가 활용되지 못하도록 만약에 그것을 어겼을 때는 엄한 처벌을 받도록 그렇게 그 입법을 했습니다. 그러므로 해서 국민들에게 안심할 수 있도록 이렇게 믿음을 주는 노력을 했죠. 그런 노력을 통해서 방역에 필요한 정보를 수집하고 활용하는 것에 대해서 국민적인 저항을 없앨 수 있었습니다. 처음에 시민사회에서 문제 제기가 좀 있었지만은 정부가 이렇게 전향적으로 대응을 하고 또 이게 오남용 될 수 있는 이 가능성을 차단함으로 해서 신뢰를 확보할 수 있었습니다.
Yes, when it comes to contact tracing, we actually had to pass a new law because we were concerned that the privacy of the people might be invaded by this tracing. And so with the Quarantine Act, we had a protective measure that was introduced to say that the only purpose that could be used for the private information garnered would be for the purpose of quarantine and quarantine only. We did expect some resistance to come from the civic community. However, because the law addressed their concerns already more progressively than which may have been expected, I think we met with lesser resistance than initially we were concerned with.
Okay, thank you. So this will conclude today's event for Mr. Chung.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's always a little awkward following such an extraordinary panel, and yet I must. So you have to bear with me for just a second. We obviously want to thank the Prime Minister for a remarkable session here with us today, and obviously to thank Hyun Jun for joining us in this incredible conversation. We learned a lot today, right? And we learned in part that data really matters and having comprehensive programs really matter. And it really matters to have a sense of community and interdependence and responsibility to kind of hopefully beat any pandemic, today's and unfortunately tomorrow's. So we wanted to thank our audience, obviously, for coming out today, for those of you who are online and for those of you who are here on Locust Walk, and we hope that you'll obviously be able to join us in the future. But we wanted to say what a wonderful cooperative program we've had with the James Ju Jin Kim Center for Korean Studies. We hope to be able to do it again in the future. And we wanted to let you know what's coming next. So as always, you can share a recording of this program on YouTube and on Perry World House's YouTube channel. You can find it in about a day or two and circulate it broadly. You can also follow us on all the social media you can imagine, Twitter, Facebook, etc. Not TikTok, as I say almost every week, and Instagram. You can also sign up for our mailing list. And you can join us here all of next week, particularly for all of the students in the audience today, for a Global Career Week where we will talk about internships, careers, and other opportunities with global impact. It's all in person. It's all happening more or less in this World Forum, and it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I believe Friday. So you can look online for more information. And we invite all of you to continue to meet with our guest of honor during the reception that is in the lounge behind us starting right now. So thank you very much. And thank you again.